Hello, and welcome to this episode of Not a Lady, a Dr. Quinn Medicine Woman podcast. I'm older sister Sarah.
And this is Kelly.
You have to say younger sister.
I definitely didn't do that because I know you wanted me to.
This is episode 2 of season 1. This episode was directed by Chuck Bowman. Different director than our pilot episode, but it was written, again, by Dr. Quinn creator Beth Sullivan. And the title of this episode is Epidemic, which is far more relatable probably than any of us expected it to be in 2020. And it was released on Saturday, January 2nd of 1993, actually the very next day after episode 1 premiered. So episode 1 premiered on a Friday night, and they premiered episode 2 on Saturday.
They don't really do that anymore, do they?
I don't think so. Though there are other countries that do this. Like, the only one that I can really think of is I lived in Asia, but Korean shows do 2 episodes a week and back to back. It's either like Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, or Saturday, Sunday. They have back to back episodes, so it does happen around the world. But I don't think in American television they don't really do that. But I guess it was the start. They wanted to get people hooked even after that initial double.
Even though half the characters look like other people.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, we'll jump in with that in this episode, really just like pointing out who is here to more or less stay for
the most part,
at least the next couple seasons. Like, actually, that's not true. We still have some changes, but the majority are going to be our regular cast. All right, we open on a really nice family scene where the Cooper children and Dr. Quinn are in the wagon playing a word game, and they're all laughing, and it's very nice, and this will actually become our iconic ending credits shot.
Yeah.
And we have Jane Seymour back as Dr. Quinn, and all the Cooper children, Chad Allen playing Matthew, Erica Flores playing Colleen, and Sean Tuvey playing little Brian, which leads into them going by an immigrant camp. We're kind of given the impression that the number of immigrants coming west is steadily growing. And Dr. Mike tells Brian, we're all immigrants. Some of us just came to America sooner than others. As they're going by, we see a pretty immigrant girl who
basically makes googly eyes at Matthew.
Or
he makes them right back.
Yeah, and Colleen makes this comment that is confusing considering we're only on episode 2, where she's like, Matthew's in love again. And we're like, wait, what? When they arrive in town, they stop by Robert E.'s blacksmith shop.
Who also now is our
regular
different actor,
Henry G. Sanders, taking over the role. Brian asks if Robert E. is an immigrant, to which Matthew very casually just throws out that, no, he's a slave, which is interesting considering that we are post-Civil War.
And he's not.
He's not a slave, but I guess the insinuation is that he didn't come willingly to America. He was brought as a slave, but has since been liberated, I guess. I think it would be nice to see going forward in the show as we get to know more of these characters if we couldn't learn more of how Robert E. not only maybe got to America, but ended up out west. Especially considering he's going to be one of 2 black characters in the entire show that I personally can remember. I don't know that if there will be more, but when we get to them, we can talk about them. Which transitions that conversation into what about the Cheyenne? And I like the moment where Dr. Quinn is unafraid to stand, that she stops everything she's doing and admits, I was wrong. We're not all immigrants.
Yeah.
Which is a nice moment. And then we get Jim Noblock as our long-term Jake Slicker. And I guess Jake, when he doesn't have haircuts to do or people to bleed, just ends up standing and judgmentally staring at the people in the street.
No, that could be that scene could be used multiple times. Then we get one of my personal favorites, which is Orson Bean as Lauren Bray, back in the store. And then we have this moment where Miss Olive arrives while they're at the store, who we quickly discover is Lauren's sister, who the children are very familiar with. And I guess she kind of says, that she heard about not only Charlotte's death, but Maud's death while she was out on the road, basically.
I guess she went looking for silver. They kind of get this insinuation.
Yeah. But at the same time, she obviously has brought all this cattle with her, so they've been doing kind of a cross-country thing, I guess.
Ranching.
Yeah. And there's this awkward moment where she basically finds out that Charlotte left her children to Dr. Mike, who at this point Olive knows nothing about. And I think they kind of start with that, like, weird, awkward, contentious moment of, like, me versus you, even though it's not really spoken. I don't know if you'd say that, maybe
No,
not.
it's like, yeah, it is. There's a competitiveness for the children's affections that's right off the bat. When the kids run to hug her, even, we see almost Dr. Mike kind of looking like, oh man.
Who dat?
Gail Strickland plays Olive, and with her return, she brings a sick cowboy.
Which also kind of introduces us to another main character, which is Grace. And so Grace is kind of like, great, you're a doctor to Dr. Mike, we got a sick cowboy. To which Olive completely disregards. And when Jake kind of walks up.
Yeah, Jake is the one who asked about the silver mines, and they talk about El Paso.
But she's basically like, yeah, Jake, we got a sick cowboy, you want to look at him? They take him into Jake's shop, and she's just kind of left there to be like...
Well, it's nothing new. It's nothing we haven't already seen, right?
But, like, I don't know. It's very intentional. Olive is very intentional about being like, cool, you're a doctor? Great, don't care. Yeah. Also, cool, you basically have my best friend's children, which probably shouldn't have happened. Don't care. Not a huge fan off the bat.
Forward. Well, they don't make her a very likable character, to be honest. And part of that has to do with we've already had, an hour and a half of rooting for Dr. Mike. And then this other character comes in. So we as viewers are almost in the same position as Dr. Mike. Like, who are you? Why are you here? What are your intentions, with Dr. Mike, with the children, with the town? Yeah, they don't, and right off the bat, they don't give us any reason, and they don't give Dr. Mike any reason to like Olive. Which is also sad because they hint at this best friend relationship between Charlotte and Olive. And I'm like, okay, I can see it, like, strong, independent woman doing her own thing, right? Being a rancher, that's normally a man's job, but she's doing it. But at the same time, there will be other moments where what we've learned about Charlotte makes us really question, like, how could they have been best friends? Especially because we're only told it, we were never shown it, right? We get the first official opening credits, which includes the narration that we will keep with us, talking about her...
I came to the West.
Yeah, her move, and that the family may be the greatest challenge of all. And it's fitting, I think, coming out of episode 1, that narration. And if you missed episode 1, you basically know a little bit what's happened. So I think it works. At this time, church is ended, and Dr. Quinn has a very short, kind of hurried conversation with Emily, who we saw in episode 1 she performed the C-section on. Emily is played by Heidi Kozak, and...
This bothered me.
It did. Talk about it.
The reason it bothers me is just because Dr. Mike basically saved her and her baby's life. She's completely aware that Dr. Mike is capable, she's able, she's a good doctor. So we see Emily kind of brush off the fact that her husband isn't feeling well, which I understand. Probably her husband doesn't want to be seen by a woman doctor.
Yeah.
That's fair, but it's just like, at this point, come on, she's been there a while, you know that she's capable, you know that she's done a lot for you, like, she's just trying to be concerned and be a good doctor, so...
Well, it probably ties into what you said last time about the men are less inclined to ask for Dr. Quinn's help than the women are, and because she's like, oh, if Sam gets really bad, I'll just ask Jake to call on him.
That's like a knife to the throat, I feel like. It's just like, okay, not only am I gonna be like, yeah, no, we're good, but like, we're gonna go see that guy who clearly... I don't know.
Well, she's rushing away, and she's got upset kids, and I kind of feel like they do a good job of making it... We don't think Emily is doing it to hurt Dr. Quinn, but we can see as audience members how Dr. Quinn, like you said, like, wow, that's kind of rude.
It'd be different if there was a male doctor and you're like, yeah, my male husband would like to see a male doctor, but I guess that's our equivalent.
That is
Jake.
I mean, they don't think they need a doctor.
Yeah.
They think they've got Jake.
Yeah. So then there's also this moment where the kids are following Olive. She's going to make lunch for them. And it's kind of awkward of like, oh, like, you can come, Dr. Mike. And she says, no, like, you guys have a lot of catching up to do.
It's kind of that middle school moment where, like, all the cool kids are going to hang out. And then they see you alone and they're like, oh, you can come if you want.
Yeah, it's kind of an afterthought, you know, and... But they do invite her, and I think it's probably nice for her to let them spend time.
Like they want her to come.
Yeah. And then it immediately cuts to Dr. Mike's at the house trying to cook, which is
how I feel every time I'm in the kitchen. I'm not good at cooking, and I don't like it.
I think you just don't.
But we had this whole discussion about why I don't like cooking, and my family came up with this thing that I don't like math and I'm not good with numbers. And we're like, that's why Kelly's good at it. She's scientifically minded, whereas I'm just like, I can't do it.
Somebody agree with me? There's nothing scientific about cooking. You literally, if it says 3/4 a cup, you get the thing that says 3/4. You don't do any math.
It's numbers, and I can't do it.
And she's very gracious and, like, compliments me a lot with cooking and baking and stuff, but literally all I do is follow recipes. Like, it's not... But I have zero talent. I just read.
I'm not brave enough. Like, I'll try all sorts of other stuff, but when it comes to cooking, it's just so much work.
But this scene just made me laugh.
But actually, this goes against my argument, because if my argument is I can't cook because I'm not scientific, then Dr. Quinn should be much better at this.
Exactly.
But actually, maybe not, because she's had servants her whole life.
Yeah, which she's like, this, it's just so
Even
clumsy.
I know not to stir something in the bowl the way that she stirs. She's just like flipping things in the
flour
air.
everywhere. She's like, oh, here's some
lard.
lard.
She like drops half of it on.
It's very dramatic, let's be honest. And of course, what better timing for the children and Olive to come home except in this moment where she's covered in stuff.
Did they have leftovers back then?
They have, I know, which is very interesting.
I mean, I guess leftovers from lunch you can eat for dinner, but
right.
Like they don't have a refrigerator.
Correct. So it's kind of funny because in the same way that you were saying they're going off to have lunch, they awkwardly invite Dr. Quinn, there is this pause moment of like, they could probably invite Olive in, and they don't. And Colleen brings it up later where she's like, you know, that was kind of rude. Like, we could have invited her. And Dr. Mike's like, I'm just kind of tired.
Yeah. I think she's embarrassed.
Well,
you
no,
can
for
tell
sure.
She's
of course.
Embarrassed.
Of course. And at this point, we know that they don't have a great
view of each other.
Right. And so, obviously, Olive gives the kids gifts in which they want to show Dr. Quinn. So, we see that Brian gets... We're not exactly sure,
It looks like
actually.
a wolf sculpture or something. It's huge.
But also, you can't exactly tell what it is. And same for Colleen. They never actually say, and it's hard to tell. It looks like some sort of brooch or pendant or maybe like a... I don't really know, to be honest. But the only one that really matters at this point is the fact that she gave Matthew a gun without asking Dr. Mike. And, like, it's a good point because...
no, she says he got it because...
He's the...
man of the house.
He's the man of the house now. Which...
doesn't make sense to me. Because saying that he's the man of the house insinuates that there has been a man in the house prior to his mother's death. But we know that their father left when, I don't know how old they were.
But a while ago.
Like 4 or 5 plus years. Like, and I guess maybe Matthew does say, or maybe Colleen says, you know, Miss Olive said I'm old enough now. So maybe it's a...
age versus
it's an age thing that he's been the man of the house, but now he's old enough to have a gun. I don't know. The explanation doesn't work for me. But then Dr. Quinn's like, to kill a man? And I'm like, why do you think that's what he's gonna do with the gun?
But like for her, I mean, she hasn't exactly been like anti-violence, but towards the Indians, but
yeah, I was gonna say she's treated a bullet wound. So I guess that is what she's seen guns used for as far as...
Well, and at this point in history, like,
post-Civil War.
I mean...
Maybe
they're not shooting for fun.
Yeah. Maybe it works, but it does seem to kind of, like you said, like, it escalates, where it's like, I'm old enough to have a gun. And she's like, you're old enough to kill someone? And I'm like, wait, what?
But I think the real factor is, like, she probably wanted to be the person to determine, you're going to be the person to protect our family. And it's like, Olive, not only, that had to be expensive. All of those gifts had to be expensive. So it's kind of like, you know, it probably was something she wanted to have a say in, and she didn't get a say. So there's that.
And I think that's fair. And maybe she can't say that. So she says a different extreme.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah, no, for sure.
We next see Dr. Quinn in the post office talking with Frank Coulson, playing Horace again. And they have a discussion about Morse code, which she finds fascinating. And I think it's a nice moment because we acknowledge that she doesn't know everything. Or, I don't know, I think it's a nice moment where we see her kind of complimenting Horace.
It is, yeah.
They actually have a nice relationship. Like, he's one man in the town that doesn't seem to be too harsh on her. Yeah,
because then he's so cute, because then, like, she gets a bunch of packages, and he's like, other women would be excited with... What does he say? I don't remember.
Oh, yeah, he's like, most women would be happy with dresses or, you know, whatever, fancy things.
He's like, but you... Medicine makes you happy. I love that. I want someone to say that about me. You don't care about material things, but medicine makes you happy.
Yeah.
I like it.
And he does also offer to help her with her packages.
But no need for that.
She says no. And I just had this flashback. I'm going to tell this story. I had this flashback of when I was in college and I was doing student teaching. You pay for a meal plan in college, but I was teaching, so I wasn't eating breakfast or lunch at school because the cafeteria didn't open when I went into school, and I missed lunch, whatever. And so I would have to go on the weekends, and they would box up a week's worth of, like, lunch and breakfast foods for us when we were doing student teaching to keep in our dorm room.
Goodness forbid you have to make something yourself.
Well, but you're paying for a meal plan.
Yeah.
You do have to make it yourself. They just, like, packaged, like, cereal
like
and
prep.
Lunch meat and whatever. Yeah. So anyway, I would always, like, on Sunday afternoon, I would end up carrying this huge box of food to my dorm room. And I remember this one time I was, like, carrying stuff and I dropped something and there were these guys coming up the stairs.
Cute boys.
And I was with my friend and I, like, dropped it and the guy, like, picked it up and he was like, can I carry that for you? And he was going into the dining hall. I was going out. And I was like, no, I'm fine. I've got it. You know, which obviously I didn't because I had just dropped a bunch of stuff. And I kept going. And my friend turned to me and was like, Sarah, you know you can let people help you, right? And when I saw that happen, and then, of course, right, she tells Horace she doesn't need help. She walks out the door. She bumps into Sully, drops all her packages. And then she doesn't even want him to help her, but he doesn't really give her a choice.
He's like, where's your wagon? Like, stop arguing. And I just
was like, oh my gosh, I am Dr. Quinn. I just don't want people to help me. It's a control issue.
You don't want, yeah.
But he does not take no for an answer, and he does help her. And we get this conversation is probably not even a minute long, and we get, like, a huge amount of historical context.
Which I will let you take.
It's such a short little scene, but it actually has so much timing about the historical context. So, Sully was getting ready. Sully, Joe Lando, we can officially be like, yeah, he's staying. Sully says he was going to send a telegram to the president. And we get context.
Who is that by the time?
This time? Well, so it's interesting.
It's Lincoln.
It's not Lincoln. It almost sounds like it because he says Black Kettle is sending a message to the president. And he says the president once gave Black Kettle a flag of peace, and now he thinks all presidents are nice. Which, I think everyone knows Abraham Lincoln was assassinated like days after the Civil War ended. And so that would happen in 1865. So we've got some more context. We're in the 1860s. 1865 was when President Lincoln is assassinated. So President Johnson is the current president. Now, we don't really know how far into his presidency he is, but there is this hint. Now, I learned an interesting thing because I wanted to read, Black Kettle is actually well known as one of the Native Americans who really pushed for peace between settlers, the U.S. Army, white people, and Native tribes all over. Namely, he's Cheyenne, obviously. But what was interesting is I wanted to look into that whole, did President Lincoln ever give Black Kettle a flag? Because if you'll remember when we talked about the Sand Creek Massacre, we talked about how Black Kettle had this flag, and that flag was not given to him by President Lincoln. What's interesting is the Council of 44, there were 44 Native American leaders, and another leader in that group was called Lean Bear, and Lean Bear was close friends with Black Kettle. And Lean Bear actually met with Lincoln in 1863, and the reason is Lean Bear was pro, like, peace between whites and Native Americans, and so he made a petition to the president to encourage the white man basically to stop being so violent towards the natives. And Lincoln made a comment, which, I mean, I know people have mixed reviews of Lincoln, right? What he did good, what he didn't do. We know he wasn't totally pro-Indian. But Lincoln made a comment like, oh, your people are more prone to violence than mine, kind of thing. Lincoln was petitioning Lean Bear to encourage the Native Americans to stay neutral in the Civil War, because there was discussion that the Indians were going to join with...
The North?
No.
What?
With the South. Because then they could make their own rules. Because, well, we can get into a whole discussion on that if you want, but, you know, the South kind of perspective is, oh, the Civil War was fought over the states' rights to make their own decisions, whereas the North was fighting for total control, but the North the North said, oh, it's about slavery. So there's this entire Civil War is kind of built on this discrepancy of why people were fighting for what, right? One's fighting for a way of life and independence of making their own decisions, which did include slavery, and the North is like, no, we're eliminating this thing that, the South is going to say their entire financial structure works off plantations, and plantations are supported by slave labor. Anyway, so there's a lot of discussion, but they were worried that the Native Americans would join the Confederacy because then the Confederacy was promising, like, we'll give you lands, we'll give you independence. So the Indians did, of course, remain neutral, whether you think that was to their benefit or not, or would have been to their benefit or not if things had gone differently. I don't know. That's a whole historical podcast that someone else probably has done. But anyway, at the end of it, they had a nice discussion, and Lean Bear felt really good about it. And at the end, like, Lincoln gave Lean Bear a peace medal and a letter signed by Lincoln saying that he was peaceful so he could show it to any white man. Unfortunately, Lean Bear ended up being murdered when he went to meet some soldiers and walked out with his peace medal and his letter, and the soldiers just shot him because Colonel Shivington had told them, they were Shivington's men, and he had told them, shoot any and all Indians you see not on the reservation, which is
messed up.
So messed up. And actually, people suspect that Lean Bear's murder was a contributing factor to the Sand Creek Massacre. So I thought that was, like, really interesting tied together. So what they've done is they've kind of pulled this peace meeting with Lincoln that Lean Bear had, and I want to say his name because he was a real person, and they've kind of pulled it into Black Kettle's storyline, which is super interesting. And then we get thrown in there, oh, well, Shivington has been reprimanded, which was true. He did get pulled. His reprimand was, hey, we're not going to let you stay there anymore. Come back to the city. But they appointed a new head by the name of
Custer.
General Custer, which I think most people are at least familiar with. Custer's Last Stand, the Battle of Little Bighorn. We're not there yet, but we know it's coming. And it should be said that at this time, so Custer was a Civil War veteran from Michigan, actually, and he was appointed as a lieutenant colonel and sent west in 1866. So this is giving us really a lot more specific time frame. We're guessing maybe 1866 is when it's
given
supposed
that
to happen.
they actually are trying to keep it historically accurate, which
right.
There's been some
wiggle room, but I feel like we're getting more and more specific things that are actually happening. And Custer was put in charge of the 7th Cavalry, but his actual main base was Fort Riley in Kansas. He would spend months at a time scouting both the Kansas and Colorado territory to maintain quote-unquote order of the Native Americans in that area. All this historical information is literally crammed into a, not even 3-minute conversation that Dr. Quinn and Sully have. And it ends with, well, who says General Custer's going to be any better than Shivington, which is some very accurate foreshadowing.
In which she says, can't be any worse, which is also
foreshadowing. And that's all we will say about that.
Yeah. Immediately we see Emily run across town basically to Dr. Mike saying that her baby has a fever, can't get him to stop crying.
Which goes to show, like, if it's Emily's decision, she is going to go to Dr. Mike.
Her baby. Yeah. And so Dr. Mike actually runs over to Jake's shop, in which he's not too pleased about. He's like, what the heck are you doing? Yeah, but she is trying to cool the baby off, running water over it. And then she inquires, does Sam have the same fever? Because we've established at this point that he's not feeling well.
Yep.
And she says yes. So she instructs Emily to continue pouring water over the baby, runs to Emily's house to look for Sam, in which she finds him, and she's followed, of course, because everybody has to be in on it.
Well, Jake's like, don't go near my patient.
Yeah. He's basically like, he's doing fine. And she's like, he's doing fine. All right, he's dead.
Which we breeze over that really quickly to the point that I didn't even make the connection. Like, Emily's husband has died.
Yeah.
That's sad. She's got kids. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah. So they've established basically at this point that she thinks it's the grip, which is not a frequent... Like, I think that was a term used back then because I don't think we hear a lot about the grip today. But basically, we're talking about influenza, which for those of you that didn't know, is also the flu. We won't go into that, but there are people that didn't know that influenza was a flu. And if that's you, it's all right. You're not the only one.
Are we going to have this conversation now? I thought we were going to have this conversation later.
I mean,
basically,
you can edit it in.
One of the people
basically
in this room didn't know that influenza was the flu that we have today.
And based on who the medical person is, you can probably guess which person that was.
Listen, we can't be smart at everything. Yeah, there's a reason each of us were brought to this podcast with very different strengths and knowledge.
But this is why the episode is obviously called Epidemic. So basically, after she realizes it is the grip, we see her at the homestead. She's packing up to get her things to go into town. Will not let the children come with her, basically in fear that they will also become sick, which mostly Colleen's not too happy about, doesn't want to be left alone. Basically wants to go to town, I guess. I'm not really sure.
Well, she's like, who's going to take care of us?
The man of the house.
We're a family, you know. It's this heavy kind of guilt trip of like, how can you just leave us behind? I think as a viewer, we're like, this is really an inappropriate response to this. But you have to keep in mind, these kids still only recently lost their mother. So there's probably some fear in there. And there's also, they've always lived in town, right? Now they're out in this homestead that's not close to anything. Right.
And at this point, like, no one probably really understands the spread of the influenza, which we'll get into later in this episode, but they don't really understand, right? If they come, they are going to be exposed, and they could get sick as well.
And she tries to explain
She tries, and then they're like, well, what about you?
You've
and she's
already
like,
been exposed.
Yeah, exactly.
But not as much as Miss Olive, which then starts a fight where, everyone's been aware that Miss Olive and Dr. Mike aren't really fans of each other.
Aren't on the best terms.
Let's talk about when Colleen is asking her why she's going when she's been exposed. Dr. Mike says something about she signed something. And you thought that I knew what it was, but now I forget the name of it. And
well, yeah, so I guess that was a dumb assumption. She mentions that she signed the Hippocratic Oath, which means she has a duty to her patients to take care of them. Which, basically, Hippocratic Oath was started by Hippocrates, who is known to be the father of medicine. And it's a list of professional ethical standards that they started way, way, way back in Hippocrates' time. I don't know what time that is.
Hippocrates lived from 460 BC to 370 BC. So
it's been around a while, is my point.
The father of Western medicine. That's super interesting. I did not know that.
basically it's stating that you will treat the ill to the best of your ability, preserve, patient's privacy, and teach the secrets of medicine to the next generation, and so on. Those are like the core values. What people really think of, if they do know about the Hippocratic Oath, is the phrase, first do no harm, which actually when doing some research is not in the Hippocratic Oath at all, and somehow it got like associated with it. But it's the idea that you won't do harm, right, to your patients. And back in the day when you were in medical school, they had to sign the Hippocratic Oath stating that this is their duty. And today a lot of medical schools still use it. It's not required anymore, and a lot of medical schools kind of adopt their own modern versions for their students. But it's basically, like I said before, just ethical standards for doctors to practice medicine.
Meaning, so her argument here where she says, they're like, you're putting yourself at risk to help these people. She's like saying, that's my duty as a doctor.
Yeah, basically.
Gotcha.
Yep. And so she gets to town. We see Robert E. making coffins.
Which, can I make a comment about this?
I suppose. You're going to, no matter what. Not like they have a say.
Robert E. is a blacksmith, not a wood carver, woodworker, carpenter. Why do they have him building the coffins? I bet he has a bunch of jobs with blacksmith shop to do. I think the only reason we have this scene is so that we can have a later scene.
Or also maybe to show the fact that people are getting sick. It's more than just the one now. It's multiple people are getting sick. People are dying.
And they're preparing for not just people to get sick, they're preparing for people to die.
Correct, because people already have it.
No, point. I'm not anti-making coffins. I just am like, why?
That's such a weird thing to say. Probably not something you would ever expect to come out of your mouth.
I'm just saying,
for those of you that are pro-coffin making, we support your decision. We just want to say.
I'm just saying that I'm against the decision to just have a recognizable character doing it because we need them to do it, kind of thing. I'm sure that there is the chances are that there's probably a town carpenter, just like we have a town barber and a town, post office worker and a town blacksmith, and we're working on a town doctor, wait, so the blacksmith is also the carpenter? Those are two very different, difficult, full-time positions.
Yeah.
We ride by that. Dr. Quinn and us ride by that happening, and she walks into Jake's shop.
Which basically there's a line outside his shop of people waiting to be seen. And he is bloodletting. He's basically bleeding out this guy, in which she's like, what are you doing to this poor man? Because at this point,
it's gross.
Bloodletting was a very popular belief during this time. Actually, do you know who started bloodletting was Hippocrates, and we'll go on to talk about the Hippocratic Oath. But Hippocrates came up with the idea that illness is because there's an overabundance of blood, which now we know is crazy. So to stop an illness, to decrease an illness and its symptoms, if you let some of that blood out, so there's no longer an overabundance, you can cure someone. Which again, if you guys remember, we talked about sepsis last week. Anytime you're opening that skin up to
bacteria,
the atmosphere, you're just waiting for bacteria. And at this point, if you're cutting into someone's direct blood supply, it's a direct route for that bacteria into the bloodstream, which can make you septic and make you die quickly, especially during this time, because I'm sure he's not, sterilizing anything.
Well, we see him put the thing in his mouth.
The bloody little razor in his mouth.
Oh my gosh.
So
it's so horrible. The only thing I know about bloodletting, I know George Washington died.
Which, you told me this. I actually looked up some stuff. Every human being has 4.5 to 5 liters of blood in them. And depending on what percentage of blood you lose can lead to other things, right? Less than 14%, you're not going to notice, right? And this is what,
Is that when you give blood?
Well, it depends, right? I can go give a liter of blood and I'll be fine. But my friend can go, who's much tinier than I am, and that may be in the 15 to 30% if you're giving a liter of blood. And that's when you kind of get people that you get lightheaded, you get nauseous, those things can happen. That's between 15 to 30% of loss. If you have anywhere from 30 to 40% of loss, that's probably when you're going to pass out. That's when your heart rate's going to go up, your respirations are going to go up, and basically anything greater than 40%, you're going to slip into a coma and you're going to die. So the reason I bring this up with George Washington is because George Washington got a throat infection and actually asked to be bloodlet.
Yeah.
In which in 10 hours, they drained 3.75 liters from him. And if you remember, I just told you that the average human has 4.5 to 5.5 liters. They basically drained all of his blood out of him, and so...
They killed him.
Yeah. Which, from a throat infection, like, that's what blows my mind is I think most of us think throat infection, we don't even think about blood. So, yeah, super unfortunate, but again, at that time, there's not a lot of information.
When that happened, I mean, we're talking early, probably 1800s when he died. So, yeah, I mean, that's going to be maybe 50, 60 years even before this. So,
yeah. So, just pretty wild. I did not know that's how George Washington died.
I knew that's how he died. I didn't know
fact.
How much.
Yeah, which is crazy.
That's so sad.
And you know what? Like, here's what's wild to me is I've seen people bleed out, and you get to a certain point, like I said, you're going to start having symptoms of hemorrhagic, like, issues. And I'm sure he did. And I'm sure at one point he passed out. And you think that they would, like... Stop, try to clot it, try to put something on it. But no, they just probably let him keep going. And 10 hours. You have to understand, 10 hours. That's insane.
I don't like it.
Anyway, it's a lot of blood to lose, but it's a very quick period for blood to be lost. So...
Man.
So this is why, like, people working in the hospital or in trauma settings, it's really, really important to... replace the blood that they're losing because you don't want those things to happen. But basically, what blows my mind about bloodletting is if you're opening blood supply and you're just letting that blood come out, like your heart's actively pumping blood. It's going to keep coming out unless you stop it, right?
Right.
So there's nothing good coming from that. And I used to think that people did it like back in the day because they thought that there was poison in the blood, which I think probably was a belief at some point.
I think he does say something about
you gotta
poison.
Let the poison out. But mostly it came from that belief that overabundance of blood was actually what caused illness, which is wild now. But you guys have to understand there's very little research at this point. They don't even know that much. But enough that Dr. Quinn knows that it's crazy and not accurate and should not be done. And so she kind of says, like, let's work together. Like, there's no point for us to be competing. Like, we have a serious problem. We need to work together to help these people. I think we kind of go back to the shop. Do we go back to the shop, or where are we at?
Do we want to talk about Lauren's character? I wrote about...
how he's like...
Well, because she says, like you brought up, she says, why don't we work together? And, you know, she says, I can help. And Lauren says, oh, like the way you helped my wife. Which is infuriating first because, if you remember, in episode 1, he didn't want Dr. Mike anywhere near Maude. Up until, you know, she's literally on the floor dying.
And he's like, do something.
Yeah.
And now that she's dead...
And now he's blaming her, which is infuriating. But then I thought about it, and I actually think this is very well-developed character here. Because we also know that, you know, we're only 2 episodes in. Lauren Bray has apparently held a grudge against Sully for the death of his wife and grandchild for... however many years, to the point, you know, they're barely talking to each other. And I'm like, wait, how can you blame Dr. Mike? Because you wouldn't let her help your wife in the beginning. But actually, I think Lauren Bray, they've kind of developed that he is always looking for someone else to blame.
Yeah. Which, I mean, he's still, just like the kids are coping with the death of their mom, he's still coping, and it is easier to have someone to blame. But it's, if someone said it to me, that would be, like, crushing, like...
Yeah, well, especially when we know
she
the
felt
context.
Responsible.
She already did.
She already felt responsible. There was the lack of, you know, medicine, and then just, yeah.
I mean, to be honest, at that point, I probably would have walked away. I would have been like, I'm done with this town. Kids, we're moving. You know, like, no, I can't do it. But I wouldn't do that. But, like, part of me was like, I feel like I would want to.
Yeah.
And but she's not like that.
I would have wanted to a long time ago.
She sees it as a moment to rise and be like, okay, who can I help right now? And so she goes to see Emily and her children who are staying, it seems like, are staying with Olive, or Olive is staying with them. Emily looks bad, and Olive tells her to just keep working, to keep her mind off of, the
fact that her husband's died.
Yeah.
Which, again, is very interesting because she's clearly not feeling well.
She's sick.
Well, and I think we should just backtrack to the moment she's at the door, you know, and she's like, I'm here to check on Emily, and she's like, she's fine, and she's like, you know what? She's my patient. I'm her doctor, and I need to examine her. So basically, get out of the way. And I like that because, one, we know that, like, Dr. Quinn doesn't like help, but she also doesn't really like people telling her what to do, which completely can relate. And so that's where we kind of see Emily's not doing great. Olive's like, she needs to keep her mind busy. She needs to keep working. And Dr. Quinn's like, no, she needs to rest. She needs to lay down. And there's this conflict moment of, listen, I'm a doctor. You're a rancher. I don't tell you how to, like, manage your cattle. Don't tell me how to manage my patients.
Yeah.
And snaps for her.
Yeah. I want to applaud.
Because I think she already knows that Olive doubts her. They obviously don't have a good relationship for many different reasons.
Well, and they do fight a little bit about my children. Well, they would be me, they would be with me.
Yeah.
If, and
but basically, I think it's kind of, she's like,
she does put her in her place.
She does. And I think it's good with the fact that it is her patient and you should not be, no offense, you're not a doctor. Don't tell me how to take care of my patients.
Right.
But also then there's this moment with the children of like, rightfully, those children
kids
should be mine. And she's like, you know what? It wasn't your name that Charlotte said on her deathbed.
They're not yours, so you don't...
But, again, it's a hard thing, because imagine if your best friend died and, like,
totally.
was left to their children were left to a total stranger. Like, you would probably feel...
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I totally get it, but, I think everybody knew this conflict was coming, but then it kind of happens, and it's like... Okay, so that's a thing.
I think the dialogue in that scene is pretty well
and Dr.
written,
Quinn, she just gets it out.
And
she's obviously holding things back.
Yeah. After that scene, we get a shift back to Robert E. working on the coffins, as previously stated. A job that maybe if he were only the town blacksmith wouldn't be his, but it was said that this scene is probably the entire reason why the writers chose to have him be the coffin builder, because we see Janelle Allen, Grace, I think we've seen her here and there, but this is the first time we get to see more of her independent of Olive, and she pays him for
Tries to.
Nice one, she requests for a nice one, and he at first kind of thinks she's buying it for someone else, but then it's clear that no, she's actually trying to think ahead for herself, which I think is a really subtle showing to the audience that she doesn't have anyone, and she doesn't probably feel like anyone would take care of her if she were to get sick and die, which we've had this brief mention of Robert E. being a former slave, and so we have to assume that probably that's Grace's story as well, and since they're the only two black characters that we've seen so far, just kind of this, I don't know if it's a hidden message or this hidden idea that they're the only ones who really are gonna look out for each other, which as I think we would like to think is not true, but at this point it does make for a nice moment when Robert E. is not gonna take the money because he says, I won't let you, I guess insinuating he's not gonna let her die, which he's not a doctor. I'm not sure how he can promise that, but it's a nice moment for the two characters. It's very sweet,
and she almost, like, they actually don't make eye contact. She turns away and walks away, but she's, like, smiling, because it's a nice...
Well, she almost seems offended about it, but really we know she's not.
Because he says no at first, and then he kind of takes a second, and then he says, because I won't let you.
Right.
Which is
it's
very
not
sweet.
A no.
It's a way of saying, like, he wants to take care of her.
We transition to the post office.
Hank, who we've met before, but is played by William Shockley, he is at the post office, basically inquiring of Horace of, why isn't my whiskey here? Why isn't all these other things that he needs
to run the saloon?
Right, why haven't arrived? In which the response is nothing's coming in and out at this time. And, if it was, it would be medicine that Dr. Mike needs.
Horace makes it very clear the stage is not coming anytime soon because basically the whole town's in quarantine in a sort of way, right?
Well, that's what an epidemic is a certain region, so.
We shift into what suddenly was scarily familiar or scarily reminiscent, frightfully reminiscent of the world 4 months ago.
More than that.
Yeah, we get in Bray's shop, people are going nuts, and they're buying everything that they're going to need for who knows how long because they know the stage isn't coming. And, you know, basically all you'd have to do is replace all the bags of flour that people are carrying with toilet paper and we'd have
2020
COVID-19.
But there is a conversation about what's actually going on, right?
Well, Dr. Mike really, like, takes charge in the madness and is like, listen. Dr. Mike pulls in, I guess, who we would consider the most influential people in the town, which would be the Reverend, would be Lauren. I think Olive kind of puts herself into the conversation. I don't remember who else was in the conversation. I think Jake's there. Maybe, oh yeah, Jake, you're right. Meanwhile, there's like pure panic in the town. She's like, we need to stop the spread.
In which they're kind of like, you mean that it's catching?
Yeah,
which is interesting terminology, only because we actively use contagious that today of like, well, just like I can catch it from you or whatever. But the reality is this is basically true because the germ theory of disease was being developed in the 1850s to the 1880s. And so at this point, they don't really understand how germs work. And without going into too much detail, there's a lot of people that did experiments and research on trying to explain germs. And it's crazy some of the stuff that they thought. It's crazy to us now based on what we know.
Well, I think even in the scene, they kind of are like, what's a germ?
Well, that's my point.
It jumps and it travels. And she's like, well, we're not really sure what it can do, but we do know there is a thing.
It's true. It's 100% true. And that's what's so funny is listening to them talk about, wait, you mean it can jump from one person to another? Haha, that's so crazy. But like that is essentially how germs work and how germs spread. And viruses actually weren't even discovered till the 1890s, so we're pre that, and influenza's a virus, for those of you that don't know. So, I mean, at this point, not only do they not know how germs are really spread, but they don't understand how viruses work either. So, I think this is really accurate.
Can you give a short version of, like, how did they think, like, one person got sick and then another person got sick?
So I don't think it really started like that. You have to do it on a smaller scale, right? So looking at insects and looking at how bacteria spread. And so there were all sorts of experiments, mostly French guys actually, that did these short experiments about how they thought, you know,
Petri dish?
No, but like a little thing that you could grow bacteria in, right? And they would leave flies in there, the flies would die, and then they would see that maggots would start. So then this is spontaneous generation. So they had to figure out spontaneous generation first.
I don't even know what that means.
Right. Okay, so it has to do with bacteria, right? So that once they could figure that out, then it was like, okay, well, how can bacteria spread human to human? It's not super relevant because it wasn't germs. They were studying germs, but not in the aspects to disease yet. If that makes sense.
Gotcha.
Like, just understanding.
It's just interesting to me because the reason I asked the question is because when I think about, like, living in Senegal and how, like, malaria was a sickness, or is a sickness.
Which I'm actually going to talk about this.
But, like, our mom and dad, part of their work as missionaries was education to people in remote villages, and what that education looked like was not necessarily what we view as education, right? Learning, reading, writing, math, science, whatever. Like, their education was basic health things that people who live really, really rural may just have never been educated or exposed about. And I remember, like, Mom talking to me about, like, when they were doing education to many of the Senegalese in the village, and they would tell them that malaria comes from mosquitoes. That was a foreign concept to them because they're like, oh no, you know, it's the evil spirits, and that's why we get it. And so, like, just basic, like, hygiene and things like that, it wasn't that they were stupid, it's just that they'd never been educated on things like, like germs or I don't know what malaria is made out of, but whatever in a mosquito that gives humans malaria to do with the blood, like, they just had never been taught that. And, like, you know, even though I couldn't explain it to you, I at least know malaria comes from mosquitoes, you know. So I just think that's really interesting to think about. Like, this scene is just really fascinating because it's so easy to be like, oh, they were so dumb back then, right? But not really. They just really didn't know, and it's interesting hearing you talk about, like, the science wasn't there to be able to actually clearly say what a germ even was.
And that's still accurate today. I think people don't understand, like, we don't know everything today either. Like, and this kind of goes into what we're going through in the world right now. Like, we don't know everything about COVID-19. That's another virus. Like, there are still things we don't know. People will probably look back at us today trying to figure out things and think the same thing. That's so dumb. Why did they think that? But when you don't know and you're trying to make sense of things, it can sound crazy. Yeah, so it's an interesting scene, and as funny as I thought it was, I kind of thought it was funny, and then I was like, no, but that's the reality, is they don't understand, and they already think Dr. Mike's kind of crazy anyway, so, like, her just spitting this stuff out doesn't make sense. So basically, she proposes that we need somewhere to quarantine the people that are sick with the flu. And they're like, well, where are we gonna put them?
Well, she says we need a hospital, and they're like, we don't have a hospital.
We don't have a fancy hospital like you did in Boston, but she's saying we just need somewhere in which the boarding house comes up, aka Dr. Mike brings it up.
Well, it's very clear, a place with a lot of beds.
Right, and they're like, we don't have that, but we do, and at this point, it's been foreclosed, so the bank owns it, so basically the Reverend's like, yeah, that would be, like, illegal. And she's
trespassing.
Like,
he calls it trespassing.
And, you know, she's basically like, well, if nobody's gonna help me, then I'll do it myself, which
So Dr. Mike.
Well, and I mean, she's willing to advocate for her patients, which I think shows who she is as a doctor. And so she goes over there trying to rip down the boards, struggling because, you know, they're, like, nailed in. And Sully comes and helps her, which is awesome. How very kind of him.
Oh, Sully showing up at all the right times when she needs help.
Showing up when needed. Next thing you know, we're kind of flashing back to... Well, she's outside.
Yeah, so they start moving the sick. And it's a good thing that they start getting those people moved into the boarding house and set up a hospital, because no sooner do they when...
They realize that Brian is sick. Matthew and Colleen bring him in, and he's obviously sick, has a fever, obviously has influenza. That's the assumption at this part. It's kind of interesting because Dr. Mike basically tells Colleen to go home with Matthew, and she's like, I'm staying, you know, like, we're family. I'm not going to leave him alone. Like, what are we going to do alone?
Well, she makes a good argument, like, what if we get sick?
Right, nobody would know. We would be out there, and which is 100% true. And I get, like, Dr. Mike's reasoning, right? She doesn't want to expose them any further. But at this point, if Brian's sick, they're, like, either going to get sick or they're not, because they've been in such close proximity already. So Colleen actually stays and helps out, starts sponging down people, which is, I guess, their strategy at this point is just to try to cool people off, bring the fever down, because that is obviously the number one symptom that people are having. And so the Reverend is there. He's praying over those that are sick, those that are dying or have already died at this point.
I think they do a good job of making it really serious, like there is a limit to what anyone can do, and people it's just a waiting game, like you're gonna make it or you're not.
Yeah, which at this point, Dr. Mike's plan is to give the patients quinine. And quinine, interesting enough, since we were talking about malaria, quinine actually is an anti-parasitic agent today used to treat malaria.
Oh.
Because malaria's number one sign or symptom is fever. And so back in the day, they were able to use quinine. Like, you can see her using the powder, mixing it in with water. They used it to bring down fever. So that could be scarlet fever, yellow fever, the flu. Malaria is what they were using it back in the day for. But today it is still used different. I found that very interesting, but we see that the quantity she has is quickly declining. And we're seeing more people get sick. And so we actually see them head over to the immigrant camp where a man has died, one of the immigrants who
we did see, like, I think super briefly in that opening scene. And we learned that it's a immigrant girl named Ingrid. Her name, we don't hear her name in the episode, but it does show up at the end in the credits. Ashley Jones is playing Ingrid. She will not stay in this role. But yeah, we see the Reverend and Matthew bring the father to the family. Let me ask you a question. Is someone who died from influenza still, do you know if they're still, like, at risk for, like, giving it to someone?
I don't know. It would probably depend on how long it's been since he passed.
Right.
And, I mean, the virus is still present in his mucous membranes, blood, all that stuff, so.
Could be.
Yeah.
Because
I'm not going to say that I know. I don't really know.
Right.
I'm not certain.
That's fine.
But
That's what I thought of when they, like, took the body to them. I'm like, you're risking spreading it, but I guess I was like, well, maybe if it's
But you know who's risking, who I'd be more worried about is the Reverend Matthew, who have literally been in the quote-unquote hospital.
That's true.
Exposed to all sorts of other people who are now, like, literally going to a whole another place where people are in close quarters.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, well, how realistic is it that they're taking one individual body at a time back to families? Like, are they really doing that? Because probably not.
Or this is just so that Matthew can have this moment to hold Ingrid.
Yeah. No, probably.
Back at the makeshift hospital.
Boarding home. We see Dr. Mike giving Brian quinine. They're sponging him down, trying to get his fever down. Sully is there, and he kind of brings up this conversation of, like, you're gonna run out of quinine, and there's actually this Cheyenne tea.
He says, I know about.
Yeah. He's saying.
The Cheyenne brew tea from the purple coneflower.
Which I guess they used with fevers. And I mean, her explanation of, like, no, I don't want to use that. I don't know anything about it. Like, I don't know how it's going to affect people, which is totally valid. Let's say if you're a physician or a provider and you give someone something, and if it has a negative effect, that's on you, So I think she's trying to.
But my counter argument would be, what are your other options? Which I think is kind of Sully's point. He's like, you literally have no other medicine. What are you going to keep them from doing? Dying? They're already almost doing that.
Yeah.
And he kind of lays a low blow in there a little bit. Because I think at first she, like, considers it, and then she's like, she becomes very, like, statistical. Like, no, I'm not familiar with it. It's a low hit. He's like, oh, you sound like someone else.
Jake Slicker.
Which is not a compliment.
That is seriously offensive. But I think he makes his point.
He's not wrong, right? And it's not even just Jake, right? Like, it's no one ever trusts her, usually, or so far, because they don't know what she knows, kind of thing.
The methods that she has used previously have seemed wild and experimental as well, even though she knows what she's talking about. So, yeah, it's totally valid. And next thing we know, more people are getting sick. We have Horace come in.
Poor Horace.
I know.
Well, she had told him to go home, and so I guess he got worse.
Yeah, she saw that he had a fever earlier, and then he got worse, came in.
This scene kind of makes me laugh, because I guess Kelly was like, Sully stormed out. That's why he's there, but all of a sudden he appears, and he's like, come on, Horace! And I'm like, where did you come from?
And, kindly enough, Myra, who we've met before, who works at the saloon.
Myra, played by Helen Udy,
comes to help, which is super sweet. And so Dr. Mike is like, sure, even though Olive's like, she's a whore, she can't help or whatever. It's like,
Olive is so judgmental. Which, people are dying, and that's what you're worried about right now.
But I like what Dr. Mike says. She's like, she's my friend, so do you need help? Yeah, so, like, quit complaining, and you don't get to be choosy at this point.
But it shows how I don't know if it's hypocritical, but, like, in the next second, Emily shows up to help, and Olive's like, yeah, come help, right? We need all the help we can get.
Your husband just died. You have a child at home, but come help.
Yeah. And thankfully, Myra doesn't take it to heart, like, and doesn't be like, oh, I'm not wanted here, I'm not gonna help. Like, she is focused on the fact that people need nursing, right?
Yeah. And so we have this kind of funny scene where she is asked to use a sponge and kind of wipe down Horace, who's sick at this point. And she basically is like, sorry, do you mean everywhere? You want me to wipe him down everywhere? And Dr. Mike's like, no, just the chest and back, we'll be fine.
Yeah. What's interesting is when she starts to take care of Horace, first of all, we can tell he's, like, really freaked out that it's her. And so there's a name for this that we already get this, like, hint that
Horace and Myra have some sort of kind of connection at this point.
This is called the Florence Nightingale effect, where a patient falls in love with their caregiver.
Which, by the way, maybe was a thing back in, like, wartime or whatever, but, like, not advised or encouraged in today's times.
No, I don't think it was encouraged then either. Oh, I'm wrong. The Florence Nightingale effect is where the caregiver falls in love with the patient.
That's probably happening too.
Maybe it's for both. I think, yeah, like World War I, World War II, that was like they talk about that happening a lot. Florence Nightingale effect. So, Colleen has been helping out. We see her a lot of times keeping careful watch over Brian. But this is the first scene where we actually see her showing some concern, maybe some remorse, regretful, just kind of perspective towards Dr. Mike. She's worried about when she's eating, when she's taking a break, whatever.
And at this point, they're kind of showing Dr. Mike. She's kind of looking pale. She's looking feverish. She's sweaty. And so...
And for once, her
perfect hair.
You knew what I was going to say. Her beautiful, perfect hair is looking beautifully messy.
Yeah.
I think they do a good transition where Dr. Mike kind of just blows Colleen off a little bit about it. And it's just like, go help. But as soon as Colleen leaves the room, Dr. Mike begins sponging herself. Kind of hinting to us, the audience, oh, she's
sick.
Not okay. We see Lauren Bray, I think very wisely, has decided to close his shop to prevent an increase in hysteria, though it's just prevented the hysteria inside the shop. Outside the shop, you have people banging on the walls.
Including Jake. Like his friend, literally, dude.
Hank's like, we're gonna break down the door, the windows, which I'm like, oh man, this is so familiar.
Which I just want to mention, notice that like before, when there's a lot of people in the store, and now, he's not closing the store because he doesn't want people to spread. No.
Oh.
Do you know what I mean? Like now, right, there are a lot of regulations because they don't want large groups of people in tight spaces among each other in fear of disease spreading. They're not doing that here. He's doing it because, one, he's probably selling out of everything.
Yeah.
And two, there's a lot of hysterics involved. But nothing is based on that. And I just think it's very interesting because that's accurate, but also probably weird for us because weird for me maybe, because I'm like, no, the point would be that you don't want to have kind of like what we're doing right now and this whole quarantine is you don't want people among one another in fear that they will get others sick. But that's not the concern.
No,
here.
It does seem like the crowd, the mob, whatever you want to call them, because they could build up into something bigger, are going to break down the door, the windows, or whatever, when, in his perfect timing, Sully throws a tomahawk. And it's so fascinating because it is really...
I forget, what does he throw the tomahawk at?
Well, I think the door, or something like Hank is going to open the door or break the window or something, and it's like right between them, kind of like the crowd, and he's like, he said come back tomorrow, which we know that Lauren and Sully, well, particularly Lauren, has not had a very kind, caring, or respectful treatment towards Sully. But then the fact that Sully shows up and protects him, and I like the look where you see Lauren from the window.
He sees what Sully did.
He sees what he did. He looks at Sully, and then he kind of moves away, kind of being like, he won't give in to feeling indebted or needing to forgive.
Yeah. Quickly, though, we're back to our hospital, and another person is sick, this time someone in the community that we know and love. Good old Jake Slicker.
Do we love him?
No, it was sarcasm. But it is Jake, only to find out that he's bled himself, which at this point looks infected.
Well, he just looks terrible. Like, I can't imagine, like, I was being grossed out about bleeding people, thinking about doing it to yourself.
No,
I'm like,
I can't even think about doing it to myself. I can't even, like, prick my own finger, and I'm, like, in medicine, so, like, yeah, I just can't imagine either. But even with all the kind of conflict that Jake and Dr. Mike have had this episode, she still is extremely kind to him.
There's no, I told you so. There's
Correct.
No, how could you do this to yourself? There's no, like, she literally
I was right, yeah.
Yeah, she just brings him in, and she's like, we're going to take care of him.
She could have been like, take care of yourself since you're such an expert, and you know how to take care of everyone else, but...
For real.
Yeah.
And I love that we see that. We see her giving of herself, even when we know she's not doing so hot. And they linger on this shot of Colleen really watching her very closely, which I think is just really good storytelling because we're showing that Colleen is seeing something and paying attention in a way that she hasn't before. I think she may have thought that it was selfish motivation, right, of that Dr. Quinn was doing all this, but she actually sees that it's actually Dr. Quinn is living for something that is bigger than herself. And it's really beautiful.
Just speaking of Colleen, then, we have this scene where she actually apologizes to Dr. Mike. And we see Dr. Mike apologize.
Well, Colleen apologizes for how she was acting, and Dr. Quinn apologizes because she says, I remember what it was like to be left behind by my dad.
Right, when my father would leave me.
And I never considered the other perspective of being the person leaving.
I really like this scene, too, because Colleen's like, I've been watching you, and, like, I want to be a doctor when I grow up, too, which is sweet and cool. And again, is that whole thing with Dr. Mike of, like, she's just freaking inspirational. She's already made a difference on, you know, this kid's life just by living with her and taking care of her.
I think it's bigger. She's made an impact on her life and the way she sees her future. And it's just because she's done what she feels called to do.
Right.
Because she could have given up a lot of times.
But Colleen probably never crossed her mind either. Like, yeah, I'm a woman. I want to be a doctor when I grow up. Like, I'm sure that never probably, you know. Well, and I would say that's probably a main reason that I wanted to be a PA, too, is from, like, shadowing other physician assistants and seeing the way that they worked with people that made me want to do that, for sure. Which, in good news, right after this scene, we see that I think it's Colleen, right, that calls everybody because Brian's fever has broken and he's better. So they kind of have this little celebratory moment that doesn't last very long because then Dr. Mike collapses.
Well, she goes out to tell Matthew, and as soon as she walks out the door, she totally just, like, falls over.
But doesn't because Sully catches her.
Because of course he does.
And, underwear. Sorry.
And
we have notes here, and all I saw was underwear next.
No, I wrote the transition into the next scene. She's in bed, so she's obviously, like, in bad shape, in her undergarments. Yes. The women are sponging her down. And Sully, he's planning to go get the purple cone flower for the tea.
Because there's no more quinine. And Colleen says, like, we don't have anything to give Dr. Mike.
Yeah, we've seen her literally using, like, the last
like, 3 different times. She, like, shakes the end of the bottle and nothing comes out. And she's like, here.
Well, you even said, like, she's faking it. And I was like, do you think
she's
faking it? Or is she really hoping that there's a little bit more in there? I'm like, come on, woman, pour some water in there, shake it around. That'll get you the rest. I recognize we're only on episode 2, but something that I find difficult is I don't think that Matthew is a well-developed character at this point in the show.
The reason that you bring that up, just because we haven't talked about what's about to happen, is basically Sully's going to go, but Matthew decides to go instead.
Well, yeah, he volunteers and is like, let me go.
Just for some context.
Yeah, and I'm like, what is his motivation? Like, even in Before, where we see him get the gun, and there's the whole thing about he's the man of the house now, and, you know, in the pilot episode, we saw him kind of being like, oh, but, you know how to take care of us, you know, I'm gonna do this or that, and I'm not saying I don't like him. I like him as a character, but I really feel like of the Cooper children, he's really been the least developed, and that has nothing to do with Chad Allen's performance or anything like that, and has everything to do with, I guess they only have room for so many storylines and so many character arcs in an episode, so I'm sure we'll get more from him, but I really feel like they just had Matthew go because they needed his character to do something in this episode.
Don't you feel like he feels probably helpless? Because at this point, Brian's been sick. Colleen is a woman, which at this point we don't really see men helping too much, so it's like Colleen has been helping, you know, actually take care of patients. He's not doing that. So he probably feels like useless. So he probably wants to help.
Right. And I think that would be great motivation if we made it clear that that's what was happening. But really, we only see the pushback about, you know, her leaving from Colleen. We get this developed arc of Colleen being really against it, then seeing Dr. Mike in action, and then coming to this turning point. I really feel like if we look at the pilot and we look at this episode, I just think Matthew, they've kind of left him a little dry as far as the character goes. I think that could totally be his motivation.
Theory.
My point is, though, I don't feel like the storytelling, the dialogue has really shown us any depth into Matthew.
But it's only episode 2, so
correct.
Y'all keep staying with us, and we will see if Matthew develops as a character.
Correct. Like I said, I like his character. Yeah. I love the show, but this is a critique that I just have so far, where I'm like, of the Cooper children, I really feel like they haven't developed Matthew at all, and I feel like we've talked about he has so much room for development, being the oldest of this family where the dad left and the mom was on her own, and then his mom dies, and they have so much material for giving him more character and giving him more development, and I just feel like so far we haven't seen that yet.
Yeah.
I'm definitely looking forward to when we'll get, and like I said, I recognize it's a TV show. They have 45 minutes. They can only work in so many character arcs into a script or an episode, but I do feel like he's been pulling the short end of the stick so far.
Yeah. But Sully agrees to let him go and gives him kind of like a necklace with some things on it that I guess will basically prove to Cheyenne that he is a friend.
It's a sign of a friend. He's to look for cloud dancing.
And so he goes into the wilderness. Sorry, that sounds so dramatic. He goes out and basically, I don't know why he basically is like, hey, soldier.
Well, he says...
Because he got lost or...
Yeah, I guess, so if we remember in the previous episode, Black Kettle's people were massacred, and those who escaped, he does say cloud dancing is with Black Kettle at Bear Creek. So I don't know that Matthew really knows where to go, much less he doesn't really have a relationship with any Native Americans. So yeah, they have him stop. We see him calling for a soldier, what looks like a soldier, but then it turns out it's actually...
A Cheyenne.
And I think the significance of that is it's a hidden sentry, right? Like, who's watching for intruders who shouldn't be coming. Because now they're wary. Like, the Native Americans are wary of who's coming near the camp. He gets caught, and then...
Oh, then they kind of, like, shove him.
And then he doesn't... You got mad because he doesn't immediately show his friendship necklace.
First thing I would do, y'all, is hold that sucker up. But no, he, I guess, forgets he has it. And then once they, like, hit him, then they kind of see him laying on the ground.
Well, cloud dancing comes up and recognizes the symbolic necklace. And cloud dancing is played by Larry Sellers, who we have seen in the previous episode, but like we said, major costume and stylized look for the Native Americans. The Cheyenne in the pilot episode were much more a lot of buckskin.
There's Benji.
A lot of braids, buckskin. Whereas now we see them, and I think some of this has to do with the weather of when they were filming, whereas now I think it's like actually California, spring or summer or something. And this will be kind of the look that the Cheyenne have for a majority of, at least this season, I'm pretty sure. And so we meet Cloud Dancing, which super interesting thing, just throwing it out there. Originally, the character name of Cloud Dancing was like Black Hawk or something, and they kind of had written him as like the most basic common Native American, and Larry Sellers himself actually became kind of a Native
spokesperson?
Well, yeah, spokesperson or like expert, and so he actually helped craft a lot of the development of the character, which I really love because it's like proper like Native representation, especially Native representation in film, which is still to this day something that leaves much to be desired. While Matthew and Cloud Dancing are heading into town, we see Olive and Emily sponging Dr. Mike without some clothes on. She's back.
Why did you say it like that?
She's backless. Because it's a weird scene, because literally Sully just stands there and watches.
It's a little weird.
I think it's supposed to be like he's worried she's gonna die.
He is worried. And then I like the scene that follows, because Brian comes out of his room, in which Sully's like, don't go in there, your mom's sleeping. Mostly being like, didn't want to get caught. But Brian's like, that's the room where my real ma died. And I just love the conversation. I think Sully and kind of all the Cooper children, but with Brian, they have this kind of like special relationship that's developing where he feels like he can even have this conversation of like, don't think that way. Like, Dr. Mike's gonna get better.
Well, he even promises, which I think is dangerous.
Well, no, for sure. And I mean, as someone in medicine, I feel like I would never promise that somebody's not gonna die. Because
I'm surprised that's not in one of the rules.
I don't know. It could be. I'm not that far in school probably then, because I don't really know. But that probably is really scary for Brian, just to be thinking that way as a kid. And so we kind of see Dr. Quinn in and out of consciousness. She kind of arouses and basically is like, the children was, I think, the only word she gets out, in which Olive ensures her, don't worry about the children. Like, the children are fine. And I think that's probably one moment where Dr. Mike is grateful that Olive is around, so there's someone to kind of look after them.
Cloud Dancing and Matthew are still making their way into town, which Cloud Dancing being off the reservation, especially after a not too long ago massacre of his people, they're being very careful, and we're not really sure how they know, other than, I guess, the flag's coming and they've heard that the new man in charge of the U.S. Army in the area, Custer, is arriving. And in this episode, Custer will be played by Taylor Nichols. They arrive at the clinic, and as soon as they arrive...
This is so dramatic.
Cloud Dancing walks in, they go up to her room, Sully picks her up.
Scoops her up.
They leave, and they put her on the horse, and Olive's, like, freaking out, and she's like, where are you taking her? Bring her back here now! And I'm like, what is happening?
It is just because I think there's assumption, like, oh, Cloud Dancing's gonna bring this tea that's gonna help everyone get better, but, like, no, apparently we're just saving Dr. Mike, and...
Yeah, I guess maybe the reason that they're worried only about Dr. Mike is because the hope is that if she's saved, then she can save more people, but I don't know the significance, like, why do they have to take her in, because they take her into the woods, which we get a short little clip of Matthew at the post office with a very still sick-looking, Horace, who's gonna send a message to the Quinn family to let them know that she's sick. And then we have kind of this ceremony, which I tried to research but actually couldn't find out much about, but they're in the woods. Cloud Dancing kind of has this he's painted this black eye band over himself. There's music, there's a lot of shot changes in and out. We see him singing over her. We see...
There's, like, fire and smoke.
And she's on, like, this, like, buffalo blanket. I don't really know if this is spiritually significant or if this is medically significant. We actually aren't really given a clear picture of what the purpose or motivation, other than we're like, okay, they're trying to save her, but what is the impact here? Which then leads to Sully being like, will she live? And then Cloud Dancing, a very cryptic, because we all need a cryptic best friend, right? That's up to you. And I'm like, what does that even mean? I guess, is it maybe flashing back to what he said to Brian, where he's like, you can't think that way, you have to think she's gonna get well?
How I interpret it is he's saying, like, yeah, there has to be some, like, Sully has to have some belief that she will get better and then she'll get better. Like, there's kind of, like, it's up to you and your beliefs.
Yeah. As a whole.
Up for interpretation.
But I mean, I guess it, it is cool. I just really like whenever we get interactions with Native American characters, so I do like that aspect. And for some reason, Cloud Dancing and Sully come back with Dr. Mike.
They do, and
bringing the tea this time, the flowers for everyone.
Which is awesome, and I love the moment where basically, they walk back in, and then, like, they bring Dr. Mike back upstairs. They don't really give any explanation, no. And then he's like, oh, like, give this tea. But then, like, he's giving the instructions about the tea, and then Cloud Dancing, is it Cloud Dancing? I'm pretty sure he just, like, puts the, like, little package he has of the tea, like, in Olive's hands, like, just drops it and walks upstairs. I just like it, because it's like...
we guess Jake is feeling better, because he makes, like, a cryptic comment, like, what's that Indian doing here, right? And it's like, glad to see her feeling better. And Olive, by the way, was super not into Cloud Dancing either. Like, I think she said something earlier, like, what do you get her down from there? What with this? She shouldn't be there with that. Yeah. I forget what she calls Cloud Dancing. It's not nice, but then this is a problem I have with Olive. She switches whose side she's on very quickly, right? The 1 minute she seems very suspicious and not into Cloud Dancing, but then Custer shows up in the boarding house and is like, we saw Indian tracks, which I'm like, They were riding horses. How do you have Indian tracks?
Yeah, what does that mean, actually? Good point.
I don't know. Maybe they found the camp where he, like, did the ceremony on her and then followed the horse tracks. I'm not sure, but I just don't...
Or they saw footprints, who knows?
Something. But then she's like, oh, got no Indians here, right, Jake? And I'm like, wait a minute, 5 minutes, not even 5 minutes, like, storytelling minutes, like, 1 minute ago, you were, like, not into the Indian being there, but suddenly they're like, oh, no one here. And smart thinking on her part, she does say, oh, we, should know we have the
case of the grip.
The grip, and, good old Custer. He's
basically,
like, okay, no problem. Let us know if you see anything.
Yeah, gets rid of them kind of fast. But, I mean, let's say she's not a kind-hearted person. If she's smart, that's the right thing to do. Especially because they've just brought all this but tea that could be beneficial for all these people. So she'd be dumb to be like, yeah, let's give him up after he just helped us. Like, she's not a total, like, horrible human being. So, I mean, it is a little weird, but I'm grateful she did it, and I'm sure the rest of them are too. And so we kind of see, after this, Dr. Mike has the tea, and we kind of see, there's, like, no one in the room, and she kind of picks up the, it's kind of like a little jug, a cup,
yeah,
and, like, smells it, because she clearly knows that, like, that's not quinine, just wondering what she's been having, but she does wake up, and...
looking a little more rejuvenated.
Yes. And in fact, she asks about the children again.
I mean, this should tell us already, like, she's definitely taken on the role of being a mother. Her first thought, again, when she wakes up, is of her children. And all the kids come in, and it's a really nice moment, because Colleen hugs her, Matthew holds her hand, and Brian, gives a little tug on Sully's shirt and whispers, just like you promised. And
it's a good thing, because if not, he probably would have hated you forever. Just saying, like... Well, this is why I think this is why she's probably so worried about the children, because for all she knows, like, Colleen's gotten sick, Matthew's gotten sick, like, she has no idea, so to us it probably doesn't seem that big of a deal, but she doesn't know what's going on.
That's true.
And so Olive kind of says, let's let her get her rest, everybody leave. Sully stays, and there's a sweet moment where he basically kisses her on the forehead, and then the episode ends. And don't give me that face. She's literally giving me the, like, roll her eyes face right now, like... Whatever.
It's too sweet for me.
He's happy that his friend is better.
His friend, but what? That's up to you? I don't know. Was that the thing? What? Was that the thing? That's up to you? What's up to him?
If he kisses her on the forehead or not, that's stupid.
Exactly.
That's not what Cloud Dancing was saying.
I mean, I guess I don't love this ending just because I guess we're assuming that the tea is going to heal everybody.
Not heal everyone. So here, can I just say something real quick? Obviously, everyone knows that the flu is still around today. The flu today is what we would call self-limiting, and the way that we treat it is with what we also call supportive care, which there's a lot of diseases and illnesses that we treat this way, in which supportive care means rest, fluids, those kinds of things, we're not actively giving people medicine. You might take a throat lozenge or two, but we're not actively, giving you medication unless you're on antivirals, which there are antivirals for influenza. So, I mean, the reality that, like, this tea can lower fever and help people get better is probably likely. And they're not saying that everybody's going to get better. It's just, it's better than nothing at this point. So I think it's a sweet moment of just, he was very worried about her getting ill, and she's better, and I think it's probably a relief for him. But they're also probably building up some, we've already said, romantic tension. Yeah, romantic tension. It is obvious that they're the two, romantic leads of this show, and I'm not mad about it. So that is actually how the episode ends. And what are your thoughts when it comes to ranking? Like, did you like this episode better than the first one?
Did I like it better?
I'll tell you what I think.
Tell me.
I was thinking about this, and I was like, I actually really do like this episode, because I feel like there's a lot of medical information, and there's a lot of character development, and I don't know, but I think I still like the first episode. The first episode's my number one. There's so much that happens in the first episode, I feel like it's kind of unfair, actually, because...
Yeah, it is.
There's so much that happens. There's, like, it's just... all the characters have their own storylines. I just like everything that happens to Dr. Mike. I think there's a lot cooler medical stuff that happens. Like, I still think I like the first episode better. And obviously it kind of, it's not a cliffhanger ending, but it's kind of like, there has to be more to come. So
yeah, it's less resolved. Which, I mean, I think the pilot is almost too resolved, right? Like, it could have ended there and it would have been like, okay. I think I probably agree with you, though. Which, it is kind of unfair because it's a double episode and we're setting up everything. If I would say which one am I more likely to watch again, I probably would watch the pilot again.
Yeah. Which, I mean, honestly, I feel that way about a lot of things, like the pilot, or even just, like, first movies in, like, sequels or trilogies is always pretty good. But we'll see what happens with the coming episodes.
What's your favorite scene?
Do I want to be predictable or do I not? I really like the scene with Sully and Brian. I just think it's sweet, and like I'm obviously not gonna give a spoiler, but I know this whole show very well, and I just like the relationship that they have. So probably that scene or the end scene I think is sweet.
I like the scene when Colleen tells her that she wants to be a doctor.
I like it too.
I think that's a nice moment for both their characters.
See, guys, moody teenagers are not always bad.
What?
I'm just saying, like, she's kind of jerky in the whole episode, and then she has this kind of resolve moment, and I like it because it's like she sees
how we see her grow through this, right?
But I think she also just recognizes how important her job is, how serious she takes it, how dedicated she is, and she appreciates it.
And I think that makes her grow as a person. Yep.
I would be curious to know what our listeners' favorite scene was.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on some of our opinions and ideas, and maybe if you...
I would love to know if you're anti-coffin making or pro-coffin making. I would love to hear your opinions on that.
Who do you think is actually the town carpenter?
But yeah, we'd love to hear from you guys, so definitely...
If you want to reach out to us, you can email us at notaladypodcast@gmail.com or reach out to us on Twitter or Instagram at notaladypodcast. And if you want more information about our podcast, you can visit our website, www.notaladypodcast.weebly.com. Weebly spelled Weebly. We really hope that you enjoyed today's episode. We're excited to talk about the next episode, which is The Visitor.
So definitely watch that before you listen to our next episode.
We look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you guys for listening, and please join us for our next episode. We will see you then.